Hey, so we learned the 4 forms of data binding in Angular 2. Well, now it's time to get a little bit deeper into this and use property binding to bind to our own properties in our custom components we create. We already created our own components in the first section, but we weren't able to pass data between those components. We weren't able to pass data from one component to a child component, for example. Now we will be able to do so in the future because we will use property binding to do this. Our first step is I will get rid, and make this a bit smaller, we'll get rid of my template content here so that I start with a fresh and empty template again. And now the first thing is I will create a new component to which we can then bind. So I will create a new component which I will just call property binding.component.ts is the name of the file. And here we will have export class property binding component. Let me zoom in a bit here too so that everything is clearly visible. Okay, now obviously I need to import component from Angular 2 core, and I will need to add a decorator here, add component, which takes a JavaScript object where we have a selector, and I will name this my property binding, and I will have a template using backticks again so that I can use multiple lines. And yeah, that's it for the moment. And now I will have just a little text here. So let's say a heading. Heading. This is the child component. It will be. Hey, and now in my app component, I will use the directives metadata to add the information that I want to use this component in this component here, so that I want to use my property binding component in this app component. And therefore I'm now able to use my property binding here, and it will get embedded, as you see. So this is this, and now let me add another heading. This is the parent component. And yeah, let's give this a little bit of a styling here so that I can clearly see what is what. So I will call this child. So we'll give this a section named child, or with a class of child. And then I want to create my parent section, parent here, which will obviously hold my heading and my child. And I will just give this a little bit of styling. So basically I want to give the parent a border of 1 pixel solid and a dark gray and a background color of a very light gray. And let's give it like 10 pixels of padding. See, yeah, exactly. And the child, well, it should have also a border of 1 pixel solid, and then let's say black, and I want to give it a background color of dark gray, and also, whoops, not there, within this, also a little bit of padding, let's say 10 pixels. Yeah, okay, so that we have this visual differentiation here. And now what I want to do is, I want to say, hey, name. So I want to greet myself in my child component. So I will have a property name, which is an empty string. And I'd like to be able to enter it in my parent component. So let's say like here, h4, please enter your name. And then I'll have an input field. So like this. And when I enter something here, I want to see it in my child component. Now, how do I achieve this? I will use a combination of the data binding forms we learned. I will use two-way data binding to bind to a name property in my app component by adding it to this input field, just like we did in the last video, by using ngModel and this parentheses square bracket syntax. And if I now enter something here, well, we would not see that it changes. So let's create a little debugger here and let's add a paragraph where I just output the name property in the app component, not in the child component, in the app component. So now here I would expect, to update this. Okay, so this happens when we enter a name here. So we got this two-way data binding working. I can remove this now. Now, how do we pass it to the child? It would be great if we could use like this syntax here. So the name as the expression, so binding to the property here, like we're doing it here with the two-way data binding, or how we would do it if we had a binding to the property value of this input field. So if we could use this syntax and then just say like, well, maybe just my name, that I pass the my name through this custom tailored property my name. Now if I try this, so if I hit save, well, this doesn't work, and that's not surprising because my name is not a built-in property of Angular 2, and it couldn't be because, or even if it were, because this is a custom component, so don't know how this should be able to output it in our component, right? So we have to change something in our child component here. And we have to find a way to create our custom property binding. We got it as a property here, but even if I were to rename this to my name, my name, this would still not work because Angular 2 doesn't know that the fact that this my name is the same text as here means that those two are connected and should be bound. So we have to tell it, we have to tell Angular 2, and we do this in the component decorator by adding another metadata configuration here, the inputs configuration. And inputs also takes an array as an argument, and in this array we specify the names of all the properties we want to kind of expose to other components to bind to. So we do this by using strings here, and in this string I have the exact same name as the property has in my child component here. So if I have my name here, I will have my name here. If I would have name here, I would need to have name here. So that has to match. And now, since I'm binding to my name here, and I'm defining my name as an input of this component, I can now type max, and it updates in the child component as well. So we basically made my name an input of our component, and therefore we are able to bind to this property. This is how custom property binding works. Now obviously we can specify multiple property names here. We could have my age, and then let me just add that my age could be like, let's say 20 by default, and I am years old, and here I would have my age. And then I could pass like my age equals, and then I'm just passing 26 here. As you can see, it got this binding, or it got this value through this data binding here. Now, while it might make sense to use my name and my age as names for our property binding here to make sure that we're not interfering with a third party or an Angular property, it doesn't fit perfectly in the child component. It would be better to just have name and age here, age and name. But if I save this, well, it no longer works because we're binding to my name and my age. That are the names of the inputs, and that are the names we have to use here. Now obviously I could change it to name and age, but then again we would have a problem. What if name was a property defined by Angular 2? Or we could run into a world of trouble here. So the best way to do it is to use an alias. An alias allows us to say, okay, the name of the property in our component here is name, and then we have a colon and the alias which says, but outside of this component, you're binding to that alias. And the same for age. So if I save this now, it again works because now we're binding to this outside of the component, so to our alias, but inside of the component, the part in front of the colon is used to identify the properties. So now we have the best of both worlds. We can use whatever property name we like inside of our component to which we're binding to, but outside of that component, we're using whatever name we specify here. Now I will show you one other way to set up such an input. One way, as I just showed you, is to use this inputs configuration and just add them in this array. Another one would be to add a decorator right in front of the property inside of our class here. The decorator we need would be the add input decorator. And now we have to import this decorator from Angular 2 core. So we then have to import input, which we don't have to do if we're using this inputs metadata, since this is already built into our component we're importing there. It's in the component decorator in the end, right? So we could use add input, and then here we would have to specify the alias inside of the parentheses. And now as you can see, it's still displaying 26 instead of 20, which would be the default. So it's working. Now, what syntax you prefer is really up to you. You could say that by using this syntax here, it's very easy to say which property has a binding and which one has not. Well, when you're mixing it like I'm doing here, it's completely hard to tell, but if you were consequent in one way or the other, it would be easy to tell which input has a binding. On the other hand, you have to make sure that you don't forget to import input, and you might prefer it to just have it in one place in this array. So both ways work, and currently there is no best practice for this, so it's really up to you. Now that is how we bind to custom properties in our custom components. In the next video, we will have a look how we listen to custom events so that we can send data back from our child here, so that we can send data back from this child here to the parent. Because in the moment, we're only sending data from the parent to the child, but we have no way of communicating back. We will learn this in the next video. See you there. Bye.